I waited for you.
Couldn't find my name tag out there, so I just gave up. Nick Bell,
Okay, I'm going to call the meeting to order. It's about 10:02, I think. And we'd like to stand to the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Haley, the first item, I'd like to welcome Marty Sugar, who will be talking to us very shortly. And I think everyone else knows each other, so we'll just go with the introductions. I'm George Topol, in case anybody doesn't remember. The minutes of August 24th meeting, motion to approve. I guess with you. Well, if there's no objection, we can do it without a motion. We can do it with come on in.
Is this okay?
Oh,
That's good. That's not too painful. You're asked, so.
I'm George Topol.
Hi, Christine Livingston. Nice to meet you.
Hi,
I just got
Christine.
sort of informally invited to this meeting.
Oh, you're welcome.
A little bit of time.
Okay. And who are you with? Christine?
I'm with Indiana News Tourism.
Oh, okay, great. Glad to have you. I'm Union Township trustee and chair for this particular meeting.
Nice to meet you.
So,
Thanks for the invitation.
yeah.
okay, well, why don't we go around and introduce everybody real quick?
There we go.
I just introduced Marty. Marty's going to make the presentation. E-Man, you already know him, man.
I'm Flora Baum with Nursing.
I'm Nick Beller, Town Winfield.
Christine Livingston, Indiana News Tourism. Nice to meet you.
I'm Kevin, I'm with NERC. I'm Scott, I'm with NERC.
Thomas Dow, Director of Transportation with Mercy.
Marty Sugar already on the side.
Okay.
But it might as well be a nurse.
I'm Phyllis Cohen, he's outside
Oh,
the thousand pounds stuff.
All right, is there any, do we want to go with the motion or do we want to just do it by without exception?
Motion to
Approve?
approve.
I guess I had seconded it. All right, all those in favor? Aye. Aye. Well, we have two ayes. Is there anyone opposed? There is no one else, so we have.
Yeah, Tom, he was.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. We just went through the minutes and we had a motion and a second, and we had the vote. We'd like to vote. Okay. I vote in favor of approval. All right, so the minutes are approved. Next is the e-commerce implementation, City of Gary e-commerce plan. Scott Weber.
So good morning. I'm Scott Weber. I'm a transportation planner and analyst here at NERC, and I spearheaded the project manager for the Gary e-commerce sub-area plan that we performed late this spring and into the end of June. So I'll present briefly on that. Go to the next slide. So this plan comes out of the e-commerce in Northwest Indiana, which is a regional plan that was adopted by our commission in November of 2020. And it's about preparing and repurposing the region for the rising tide of e-commerce. It's on our website. We adopted it in November of 2020. It did win the 2021 National Association of Regional Councils Achievement Award, or one of the award winners in 2021, so we were proud of that. And so the next step was to do implementation plans in the various communities that we've identified as clusters of ripe for e-commerce development. So one of those, the first one, was the City of Gary e-commerce sub-area plan, which was completed this summer in June of 2022. So we go to the next slide. So kind of just a brief overview of what we're talking about here. So phase one is this regional plan that I talked about, the e-commerce in Northwest Indiana that we adopted back in November of 2020. And so that's, like I said, it was a regional plan and a blueprint for helping our communities prepare for expanded opportunities in e-commerce, and especially for the rising tide of transportation, demand, and logistics, TDL facilities. And so that kind of placed the context of our region in Northwest Indiana around the Chicago market as well as the Indianapolis market, and we were kind of poised to be kind of right in the middle and develop our own e-commerce market and how we interact with the rest of the U.S. and global market. So phase two of this whole effort was the implementation of sub-area plans of e-commerce in Northwest Indiana. And so that's what we're going to talk about, and I'm going to talk about the City of Gary, which was completed in June of 2022. There are still some steps to kind of tie it up in a kind of a pretty picture, but right now we still have a final draft version that we're working slide. So how we went about in identifying where these sub-area plans could be located is we looked at the regional plan, the e-commerce in Northwest Indiana. We identified 5 clusters of ripe for e-commerce development that could support the market. So as you can see there, these 5, they look like kind of like the Olympics rings here. We used our travel demand modeling and identified, like, if we were to place hypothetically a major transportation demand and logistics facility of about on the order of 500,000 plus square feet in each of these areas, how many jobs would that attract and how much traffic would that generate? So the one that we focused on initially was this area in the far northwest, which is centered in the city of Gary, right off the Orman Expressway, I-94. Go to the next slide. So in order to kind of advance this concept, we consulted the city of Gary's 2019 comprehensive plan for areas zoned that are planned for light industrial, employment, flex, and other areas that we found suitable for e-commerce around the targeted zones from the travel demand modeling that I mentioned. That took place in 2021. We heard feedback from the city's redevelopment director, now former redevelopment director. They're still in process right now, but that was fall of 2021. We issued a request for proposals for consultants specializing in planning, market analysis, and engineering to conduct this sub-area plan. We issued that in February 1st of this year. And it was important that the consultants have a variety of expertise or be willing to hire sub-consultants with all of these areas of expertise, because this plan is not only meant to be kind of land use and planning in character, but also have a rigorous engineering analysis, because this is using transportation funding. So we're required, when we use transportation funding from US DOT, US Department of Transportation, to have kind of a transportation focus area. However, we received no responses by the RFP deadline. So we released a targeted RFQ in March 8th of this year. And we did receive a response from the ARSH group, with sub-consultants Goodman Williams Group, First Group Engineering. They were awarded the contract at the end of March of this year. It was a very tight time frame. They had to be finished by June 30th because that was when the funding would expire for this project. So that's when it was completed, right? June 30th of this year. But go to the next slide. So this is just some of the excerpts from the plan. This is the cover page, but I'm going to show you what in the table of contents, what the sections are. There's an overview, the existing conditions, the future direction, development concept, and next steps. If we go to the next slide. So kind of, we'll start with an overview. Well, so the area for the sub-area plan actually took a while to develop. So we initially, like I said, we looked at the travel demand model, the travel analysis zone, or the TAZ shape. But then after a back and forth with the city, we realized that this was kind of the plan area that we really should focus on, that was most suitable for their needs for transportation demand and logistics for a TDL facility. So it's generally, this plan area that we agreed on is generally along the I-8094 Orman Expressway corridor from about Klein Avenue to Grant Street, and in the 25th Avenue in the north to 29th Avenue in the south, but it also includes a segment along Grant Street, along the Grant Street corridor from the Little Calumet Levee to the Norfolk Southern Railroad tracks, right near Ridge Road. So this is kind of the sub-area within the city that we looked at for this plan. So go to the next slide. So the process that we went through is we started actually with our NOEI 2050 plan, which is our long-range transportation plan for the region. We looked at the goals and objectives, and that kind of led to the commerce study. But then we brought that to the city of Gary, and they had a comprehensive plan, like I mentioned, their 2019 comprehensive plan, as well as this new concept called the M-Flex plan, which is kind of a plan for light industrial facilities. So we took that into account in developing this sub-area plan. And so how the sub-area plan then materialized based on these past efforts was it looked at land use, market conditions, transportation, urban form, and recommendations. And then finally, heading toward implementation and priority action steps that this plan will hopefully lead to. So we go to the next slide. So this is looking at the existing conditions in the Gary sub-area plan. This particular map shows the land use existing conditions. But we looked at demographics, land use, general zoning, market conditions, transportation, infrastructure, and urban form. And as you can see in the northern part of the sub-area, there's a lot of residential, a lot of yellow on that map. Actually, not all of it is fully kind of built out, or there's also a number of vacant parcels as well in there. But you can kind of see that there's also a lot of service station areas, especially along the Grant Street corridor, just south of the Orman Expressway, as well as just north of the First Street interchange there. But yeah, so this is an area that had a lot of opportunity to look for where we could site transportation demand and logistics or TDL facilities. So if we go to the next slide. So the future direction kind of segment of the sub-area plan looked at dividing this whole plan area into block groups, as they call them. Not to be confused with the Census Bureau's definition of block groups, but these are essentially like super blocks of the sub area. So we actually looked at 16 of these that were possibilities for how they could develop into potential transportation demand and logistics facilities to support TDL facilities of approximately 200,000 square feet in each one, and which ones have the greatest potential. So we go to the next slide. Oh, actually, I should mention that we also identified kind of the transportation network around these sites and where the potential improvements are. So where you see circles are where the engineering subconsultants, first group engineering, identified possible candidates for intersection improvement projects. We didn't have enough in the budget to kind of go into detail and do a detailed engineering for each of these potential intersection improvement projects, but it will potentially help the city if they want to apply for funding in the future to kind of look at these intersections. So we go to the next slide. The development concept portion of the plan looked at kind of what these transportation demand and logistics facilities might look like in each of these block groups. So as you can see highlighted, these are just kind of specking out the block groups that could best support TDL facilities and what they might look like. These are conceptual. It's important to remember. These are not detailed engineering or architectural drawings. But in each of these block groups, we looked at kind of roughly 200,000 square feet of TDL and what that would look like. Initially, the city of Gary seemed like they were mostly interested in larger facilities of like 500,000 square feet or more. You can understand they would bring in more tax revenue and more jobs. However, in the market study that the consultant performed, they found that the sweet spot for these types of TDL facilities was roughly in the 50,000 to 200,000 square foot range that could best be supported in this area.
If you can just say what's the TDL?
Oh, transportation demand and logistics facility.
Yeah.
So, these are just this is a high level concept of what's in that summary plan for each of these block groups. We go to the next slide, and then again looking at the development concept. This is kind of more of a spec up of each of some of these block groups and what the potential transportation demand and logistics or TDL sites might look like. And you can see kind of how they might look in each of these block groups. So it's a pretty substantial amount of land that we're talking about potentially developing. We go to the next slide. So also out of this summary plan came a series of detailed next steps and costing estimates for each of these projects. I apologize if it's hard to read. There's a lot of words on this slide. But basically, you can see that they timed out for the next roughly 10 years or so what some of the action steps and priority action steps might be for advancing this plan and better preparing the city for TDL developments.
Parties identified to implement,
Yeah.
parties identified, see the action step, but I don't see the parties that would be the partners in implementation.
So that I don't think that was as fully hashed out in the amount of time that this plan had, but that's a good suggestion to kind of look at. I think that we talked about in developing this plan who those partners might be, but I guess it didn't make it infographic. But yeah, you can see, for example, we divided kind of the areas of work into land use, transportation, infrastructure, development, and urban form, as I mentioned, and some of the action steps. And you can see some of them are already ongoing. For example, number 2 in the land uses acquire properties throughout the area with focus on high priority block groups. So there's already assemblage going on and acquisition by the city for preparing some of these block groups. And then on the right, that shows some of the cost estimates. And again, these focus on transportation implementation steps because the funding for this project is currently coming from transportation dollars, Department of Transportation dollars. So it makes sense that we have to kind of show this transportation focus in order to continue to receive those funds. So again, a lot of and I'll just give you an example of what one of those projects is in the transportation column. For example, number 1 is 25th Avenue from Colfax to Burr. There's a proposal to reconstruct the road with 2-lane with a left turn lane segment, and at Burr construct a bike trail, or at the Burr Street area. And the costs for those are $2.6 million and $1.4 million respectively. The total cost for all of these projects is $60.9 million roughly. So it's a substantial kind of long-term implementation plan for the city.
And Scott, wouldn't it be fair to say that most of those steps would be, the city of Gary would be the lead on?
Yeah.
Yes.
Because they're either dealing with local road infrastructure or rezoning existing parcels, but there may be some like promoting the sites might fall to the Chamber of Commerce or some other entity.
Right. And Gary Department of Redevelopment has really been the one that's been most working with us on this plan so far. But that doesn't mean that other elements within the city of Gary, and also, like, for example, Gary Public Transportation Corporation might be partners in kind of helping implement this project as we move forward. So, next slide. Okay. So again, these are just kind of the last steps that we're going through right now. So the Gary Redevelopment Commission is still reviewing the final draft. They came together rapidly, and they've had a lot of staff turnover, as I mentioned, and stuff like that happening recently. But we do plan to add the final plan to our website soon. And then we're planning to look at the other sub-area clusters that I mentioned. So the Gary one was one of 5, but there are 4 others. So looking at the Crown Point, Maryville, Burns Harbor, Porter County / Valparaiso, and LaPorte County / Michigan City. These are the entities that will be involved in the next 4 sub-area clusters. And then we plan to issue a consolidated RFP for e-commerce sub-area plans for all 4 of these sub-area clusters together, because we found that maybe there wasn't much interest in the last round because it was only a $50,000 project, but we could package that potentially for $50,000 for each one, up to about $200,000 for an RFP. And we plan to complete the e-commerce sub-area plans for the remaining 4 clusters by approximately the end of 2023.
We might clarify too that we would be contributing 80% and expecting the local government to pick up the other 20%. So when it says 200,000.
Yeah.
And just to add something, when we did this study, as we did the analysis and the transportation modeling, we found out after we completed the study that some distribution centers actually came within the area that we identified that is a good area for e-commerce. So the Amazon in Crown Point or Maryville, and the other one in Valparaiso, and we found another one in Gary, which is really, like this is give us some good confidence that we really did the right thing and we did the right analysis for all of these companies, because they do market analysis and logistic analysis, and to be located in the same location that we identified, that was a good news for us. So I'm glad that we continue to do this type of work, and we're gonna looking at, as Scott mentioned, to the other 4 areas and see if communities can apply for that.
Yes, certainly. So, if there are any questions, that's all I have to present.
And so, Scott, we were talking about meeting with the 4 communities during the end of this year and then initiating the procurement process early next year.
Right. Yeah, so we want to get the sub-areas, the geographic areas of those sub-areas scoped before we issue the RFPs, because we found that with the city of Gary, it unfortunately did take a lot of time after we had already gotten the consultant under contract to then kind of rescope the area just so that we were meeting the city's needs. So we do want to make sure that we meet with the communities in advance to decide which areas are best suitable.
I might like to add that with the Willow Creek coming through, half mile on either side of the Willow Creek will be an economic development plan for the county. So maybe we might consider that as a possibility of being included.
Yeah, well, we certainly will work with our partners as well. And
I know we don't have, we got to do everything through the county as a township, but with growth, it may become an incorporation situation like Winfield. It's been a long time though.
Yeah.
What, 90s was it?
93.
93. That was the last incorporated community locally that I'm aware of.
Yes.
And they're doing a fine job down there. Keep up the good work.
Further questions?
Thank you, Scott. There's no action required on that. The next item, and it was a very good presentation. I appreciate the information. Eman, update on current Jersey projects, 2050 land use element work.
Yeah, we had talked about that. Of course, Marty is the consultant, and he's responsible about doing the work for the land use element. But before going to that, I want to just mention that we will be releasing the NOFA next week, And the land use committee will be reviewing two major things, the planning. So we have planning applications for land use corridor planning, and we also have a TOD planning and TOD implementations. So these the type of planning or related to the land use committee. The other one would be the quality of place. And in this one, I think we have funding only for traffic calming, and that will be funding coming from INDOT. So that's another application that also the land use committee will be responsible to review all of these applications. So it's gonna be released next week, and then will be due like maybe end of November, and then the land use committee will review all of the applications in January. So we will have a next meeting in January reviewing all of the applications and the scoring and everything.
Great.
Is the NOFA release delayed again?
Yeah, it was supposed to be tomorrow, but actually it will be next week, on Tuesday.
So are we meeting
Okay.
soon?
No, we're not meeting before January,
Oh, okay.
so.
We don't have
review projects?
Hmm?
And then I'll do review projects in
Yeah.
January?
Okay, and then I give it to Martin. to lead.
Martin, take it away.
Well, thanks for having me here today.
My pleasure.
I'm going to present part one of the land use settlement, which is called, I think appropriately, Finding Meaning. First of all, let me introduce myself because most of you don't. Craig does, but most of you don't know me. Our firm, I'm Artie Schuchert. Our firm is RDG Planning and Design, and we are planning architecture, landscape architecture, and full service design firm.
That's good.
I am from Omaha. Our other main offices are Des Moines, St. Louis, smaller offices in Denver, and single person outposts in various places around the country. So actually literally from Phoenix to New York, we've got people scattered around. So I, as some of you know, have some family history with the area. My family is from Chicago. My wife is from South Bend. We have been around the area. We're in the process of doing two elements of the 2050 plus plan, not just land use, but also active transportation. So these are coordinated. So it's very interesting, for example, to see 25th Street show up in the e-commerce plan, because that is an important part of the active transportation plan too, as an important corridor that's an interurban or intercommunity corridor. It's appropriate that the first part of this planning effort is called Finding Meaning, because in part one, and I know the committee will get copies of this, is really that kind of an exploration. It's understanding what's going on demographically in terms of development, and to sort of lead to a story of discovery in a way of finding what's going on and how that becomes appropriate. An interesting problem with a regional plan like this is doing what's helpful, but not necessarily getting in the way of the land use planning imperatives of municipalities. So what we're not doing is telling Gary, for example, or LaPorte or Michigan City what they ought to be doing, but looking at things on a more regional level in terms of population development needs, strategic corridors that transcend community boundaries, and also putting local plans into a regional context. So it is not going in and saying we are going to do another plan for Gary, which has already done a perfectly good land use plan in 2019, but thinking about the region and regional needs and regional change, and seeing how all these pieces fit together. So So the components of the floor, if you would, because you're going to be in charge of the presentation, well, I mean, I'm giving it, but you have to move the slides.
It's all on floor.
Yeah, so what we're going to be looking at today are existing land use patterns that are looking at largely at urban versus rural, or really municipality versus extra municipality development, and some environmental features and how land use patterns and environment are interestingly enough fitting together at the 15-minute city concept, which NERC's got a fair amount of work on, and which is an interesting, if not actually totally new concept, as you'll see, at population trends, which are going to be really quite important in terms of understanding what's happening dynamically in the region. A little bit of common themes in past plans. So we've reviewed all of the existing comprehensive plans, more or less, although I still have some work to do on Gary's. And looking at common themes, again, from a regional perspective, housing trends, and then moving into policy areas and focus corridors that are more or less regional corridors that we think are strategic in terms of involving a deeper look in the next couple of phases of the project. So next slide is looking at overall land use on an MSA-wide basis. And so it's always an interesting thing to look at a map like this. This is actually generated by an application called Urban Footprint, which analyzes data if you put the right numbers in, and then produces output of what the current situation is based on the information that the program can gather. And the real value of this kind of a plan is not so much to go down to parcel by parcel land use, but to look at overall patterns. And so patterns that emerge that are of no surprise to those of you who live here, but are interesting to look at, are the primary focus of industrial development being on the lakefront, but not necessarily, except for a few employment clusters, expanding beyond that. So there's some specific areas that are not on the lakefront, but most of the industry, most of the employment is there, and it is interesting, although we haven't included it in this presentation, that jobs are concentrated on the lakefront, but the people who have jobs are located outside of the lakefront. So there's that kind of movement as well. The highest density of development is along the western edge of the MSA, and that will probably increase somewhat with the Westlake Corridor development and increasing density related to TODs and the access of that resource. The idea of a transect, which is not, some of you may have seen these. In fact, I think it may be in the 2050 plan now. The idea of a transect being a gradation from rural to high density urban development. It was a construct that was developed by the new urbanists, specifically by Andreas Swaney. It doesn't always hold in every case, but actually in Northwest Indiana, it's pretty accurate in terms of describing at least historical development patterns. And in fact, you can see that if you were to draw a kind of imaginary line from the southeast to the northwest and looked at a development section, it would go from rural to large lot, semi-rural development, to suburban, to older first suburb, to the lakefront cities like Hammond and East Chicago, which at least at one point were high density environments. So that pattern is relatively clear in Northwest Indiana. Major issues that appear on a regional basis. Some of these are municipal, like the very large amount of land that Gary has to maintain within its city limits, and a declining, and in fact, almost catastrophically declining population that's now spread over that area. So when we look at density, as we will in a few minutes, Gary actually has one of the lowest number of people per square mile of any place in the region, including rural areas in the region. 67,000 people spread over 57 square miles, or only about, I think it's 1,212 people per square mile in the 2020 census, which is almost unsustainable in terms of providing municipal services. Another main issue is ex-urban development or extra-municipal development. So we'll see some interesting information on the location and relative growth versus of population and housing within and without municipal boundaries. We have a variety of commercial configurations, from South Lake Mall to traditional downtowns to town center districts, and just kind of a little bit of everything. And obviously preserves like Indiana Dunes and Hobart Marshes and a variety of other features make open space a significant permanent land use within the areas. Some regional observations of land use patterns. For our next slide. Here we are now delving into, again, the process of discovering meaning, of looking at the relative changes of growth and population within municipal boundaries and outside of municipal boundaries. And it creates some very interesting findings. So if you look at the bottom cells, which are the overall MSA, urban population within municipal boundaries has been almost exactly the same from 2020 as it was in 1980, increasing by almost nothing, given the population area, about 2,000 people. But within that are radical changes from one place to another. So again, this is not something that is a surprise to anybody, but it's almost like an interference pattern where the highs and the lows cancel each other out, produce what looks like a flat population. Rural population, on the other hand, has increased, but not quite so dramatically, or not quite as dramatically as one might think. So there were about, as you can see, about 128,000 people living outside of city limits in 1980, just not short of 160,000 in 2020. But that is not a really radical change. So, and it's still a relatively slow growth rate. Within that, you can see that in Lake County, again, not surprisingly, almost all the population is within municipal boundaries. In Porter and LaPorte, it's more like a 60-40% proportion, but still the majority of the population being urban, not necessarily high density urban, but urban development. So the next slide looks a little bit at the geography of development of land use outside of city limits. And you can see where that occurs, not surprisingly, mostly in a belt that if you drew an ellipse that incorporated Valparaiso and LaPorte, but went up to the southern edge of the municipalities, that's where most of that concentration exists, and a little bit happening in southern Lake County. But now, if we superimpose that on topography, this is where it gets kind of interesting. So that is the next slide. Yeah, there it is. So the yellow areas are slopes, are where the topography gets steeper, and we have the drainage divide between the lake and the Kankakee River. And that's where most of this stuff is concentrated. That was a really interesting thing to see when we superimpose those two maps together. So in other words, we're getting development, ex-urban development, low density development in these hillier areas that are not particularly served by municipal utilities, and not all that easy to serve by municipal utilities, which suggests a belt there that is probably going to see this development as an end use, as a permanent use, and the urban development being more adjacent and contiguous to existing urban development in municipal centers. We talked to conservationists on our last trip on the, Mitch and I were out on the Little Calumet Trail, sort of going overland a little bit where the trail was not developed, and ran into a person from the university who is really managing those wetlands, and he was showing us the surrounding. So interesting to look at the interaction from a regional perspective of topography and development density. Next slide. Now going to the other end of the scale, the idea of the 15-minute city, an idea that's not really a particularly new one. I'll get into planning history a little bit, that the concept of a neighborhood unit, which is really what a 15-minute city is, was developed initially in the 1920s by Clarence Perry in the New York area as part of the 1929 Regional Plan for New York City. And the idea of a city that would be developed with a green space and community facilities and school in the middle. So it's very familiar to, all this stuff is sort of, shall we say, to use a cliche, old wine in new bottles. It's not, the professor in France who, quote, developed the idea, just like new urbanists are kind of repackaging and remarketing something, an idea that had already existed. In fact, one of the best examples of that, of implementation, that was Radburn, New Jersey, very famous project that's built on that model. Unfortunately, only one of these villages was built. This was to be a city of 9,000 people with neighborhoods and schools and community centers at the center of each neighborhood. I had a chance to visit Radburn. It's really one of the most beautiful urban environments I've ever seen. But and has a lot of patterns in it that are wonderful from a livability point of view, but are a little bit counter to the new urbanist idea of street-oriented development, because the idea of Radburn was that the way that you lived in an auto-dominated environment was to separate the two. So the Radburn idea was really where the cul-de-sac was really kind of invented, was to be able to walk from house to park to regional park to community center to shopping area, to be able to walk or bike there without encountering cars. Completely separated environment, and it works. I mean, it's really pretty beautiful. But so now we come to our area, and so next slide. So this is a slight modification of the framework that Peter put together of a 15-minute city. And what we've added to this is a 10-minute bicycle ride. Interesting thing is that a study called the National Household Survey that was done by the Federal Highway Administration and is popularized by the League of American Bicyclists, found that in that survey, which was a random survey across the nation, that 40% of all trips are less than 2 miles in length. And most of those trips are made by car by default. The 15-minute city concept is that you wouldn't necessarily use cars for those trips, that school or shopping or town center would be within 15 minutes of an active mode. And so if we took a 2-minute or 2-mile radius around the center of communities or major focuses or nodes like school campuses, that would pretty much correspond to a 15-minute bike ride, 2 mile at 12 miles per hour, which is slow for some riders and fast for others, but we're going to assume everybody's on e-bikes, so it's not so you can see the coverage in this case, using town centers as a centroid is really pretty strong in the northwestern area. Not bad farther south in central Lake County. The heavy line, just for orientation, the heavy line going north and south side 65, so you can see the South Lake area as a real focus of that kind of development, Valparaiso as well. But it gets quite a bit thinner as we get as again we see that more exurban or residential area outside of the development clusters. So the 15-minute city is very difficult to retrofit. It's hard to turn it into places that are already built up. But for new development, it becomes a pretty reasonable guide. And it's kind of an interesting thing to see just from an access point of view. And in terms of the other issue that we're dealing with, and that's active transportation, of what that means in terms of regional connectivity, not just of long corridors, but also of internal connections into these various centers and trails as well. So,
Can I ask a question about that?
yeah, sure.
We just have so much density here. I'm curious, is it just the 15-minute city idea, which I love, is it hopeless to think we could retrofit some of these areas to work in that manner? Or did you say it doesn't really work as well? But
Well, there are two issues there from the policy point of view. One is this is a map of barriers. So number one, if we look at the areas that we have right now, they look good on paper, but where they're divided by railroad or freeway, then we've got a problem. So in effect, a lot of those circles would be chopped off. So that's one of the things that we have to look at in terms of both land use patterns, but also active transportation.
Yeah, you can see it really well with the circles by the lake, how it cuts off at the circle. And I think the other thing too is that on the regional transportation and statewide transportation planning side, we focused almost exclusively for 50 years on mobility. How do you get through the region? How do you get from one end of the region to the other? And I think what this does is this shifts the emphasis a little bit in terms of how many places can you access within that 2 mile. Yeah, and so shifting away from mobility and more toward accessibility at a local level. And can you do it by walking or biking or transit?
Well, and it lines up really well with what they're trying to do with the transit district, where they're trying to get that last mile.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
And the older communities are laid out on a grid too, so I think it would be easier to retrofit those to have bike lanes and other accommodations. But some of the suburban areas where there's more cul-de-sacs, what do you do with those? So.
Yeah, but on the other hand, there are still ways to do that. So so it may be a little bit more circuitous, but those connections can be made through wayfinding or even techniques like bicycle boulevards or sidewalks that are strategically
is to add barriers, all the barriers that.
That you can't, yeah.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that would be good to add that to the map.
Well, it's on there, those are the black lines.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a black line, but like it's still.
But chop them off.
We have water features, we have
That's right, yeah.
other
All the other
things
things
that is
that-
not connected.
Right,
And I think maybe we can like make it by county or by area, so we can zoom
Yeah.
more
yeah, and
So
blow
we-
it up. a
and
bit,
blow it
yeah.
up and add all the barriers,
Right.
and we say, we can look at what's left and what kind of improvement that is like
Yeah,
doable.
exactly right. What can we do feasibly? Because,
Yeah.
I mean, we can't put tunnels under every
Exactly.
interstate,
Mhm.
but
There may be
there
ways to
are,
prioritize it that way.
yeah, that's right.
Mhm.
And to make those a valid, transportation from the MPO's perspective, from Nurse's perspective, a valid transportation priority.
Yeah, so I think there's that internal within the circle aspect that we're just talking about. But I think, Marty, the other aspect too is when we're developing
That's right.
the
Road
active transportation
yeah.
network and the transit network, you know, how do they connect those different 15-minute?
In the emergency communities.
But as you'll see, the primary areas of growth have over the years shifted this way. So,
South and east.
south and west, yeah, so that means that there is a template for how those areas should develop. So that's the other part of the equation. It's not just the areas that are built up that involve really effectively barrier removal, but the areas that are yet to develop that,
Exactly the point that I'm interested in.
yeah,
Because I think that we're probably the next in line to be a developing area.
Yeah. we will get to that though later.
Okay. I don't want to feel left out.
Yeah. Remember, we were at this is kind of the beginning discovery phase. So we're sort of, part of what this is doing is sort of trying to focus in on what the regional land use plan should be addressing. And as opposed, so it gets into those areas, like where will growth take place? How should it take place? What are the densities or the relative parameters of that growth going to be? Okay, next slide is now another. So here is superimposing the very same thing on existing land use. So again, you can see that belt of more or less rural, large lot development outside of the cities. And the growth areas around places like Cedar Lake and Crown Point, which are pretty strong new growth areas as opposed to redevelopment like the ports and so forth.
Marty, I do have one question about the circles that you have on this
Yeah.
map. Is that the same as what we had given
Yes.
you originally?
Yeah,
You
with
didn't add
the
any-
added, so the red dotted line is added, and that's the 2 mile radius around 2 mile quote by.
Yeah, because I think what we had done originally was just put them on the city halls.
Yeah,
Because we
yeah.
assumed they were
They were
downtowns, and then
downtown.
we added universities too. And I'm wondering if are there some other nodes that we should have?
I would think in our community, everything is centered around the high school.
Yeah,
That's smack dab in the middle of the town.
yeah, high schools are,
And that's,
yeah,
all the activities take place around there. There's
Yeah.
no way to get there unless you play Frogger.
yeah, this is basically,
Right.
Thomas, using the map that we had, which is basically city halls and.
I mean, I think, we could easily put circles everywhere there's any.
Right, but
development.
high schools, we have those located, so that's, and actually, in terms of the active transportation plan, they're critical destinations. High schools and even middle schools. Yeah.
That's the same location.
Yeah,
So there's obviously a pattern that jumps out at you when you look at this map. The residential land use outside the circles, outside the 15-minute city circles, clearly it intersects directly with the moraine.
yep,
And State Road 2 is the line of demarcation.
yes, it
Essentially,
is, right,
everything south and east of State Road 2 is basically rural.
right.
Everything north and west is suburban
Some sort of-
/ urban. But yeah, it's pretty striking when you look at it from that standpoint. If you look at the area, especially the areas surrounding Valparaiso and between Valparaiso and Chesterton and between LaPorte and Michigan City, that obviously you can see how the policies fell together over the years in terms of the county planning in those areas. So it's, yeah, that's pretty striking.
Yeah, pretty interesting.
I think that has a lot to do with the availability to utilities, as to what, something you said earlier. Those areas, north and west, can generally get Lake Michigan water.
Yeah, that's
Areas
true.
in the other watershed,
Yeah, the Marines.
it's, commonly known that the KT watershed, you don't want water from that watershed. You have to treat it. There's community wells, it's a lot of it.
Well, it's also an attractive area. I mean, it's an attractive area to build homes within because it's hilly and it's beautiful in that area. So I get why people would want to live there, but and obviously that's been attractive as well. If you look at the areas around Valparaiso in particular, in between Michigan City and LaPorte, those township areas, it's all very beautiful, moraine land.
I was surprised though, and you'll see this now in the next group in a minute, but it's not those. You're not necessarily seeing astronomical growth outside of the city limits. I mean, it's there, but it's not.
Coming.
Yeah, it's not like.
There's been a lot of land acquisitions.
Coming.
Yeah.
Northwest Indiana has been picked up by national developers now,
Yeah.
so it's coming.
Yeah.
It's here.
Here.
It's here.
Yeah.
Lennars and D.R. Hortons and places like that are already gobbling up land like crazy, and not even just Lake County and Porter County, and starting to look at LaPorte County.
The people out of Florida and Illinois, they're picking up a ton of land and we need that too.
Yeah.
Okay, so next slide. Oh yeah, this is an interesting one. So obviously when we talk about density in 15-minute cities, we really look at active transportation. This is really focused in on that. So what we've done here is superimposed the South Shore, the Westlake Corridor. Those are a lot of stations are the big red dots, and the future stations are the new stations down in Dyer. Regional trails, which are the darker purple lines, the various bus lines, most of which are not going to have a very big impact on development patterns, with the possible exception of the Broadway BRT, which is a more sort of, it's still half-hour frequency, but it's an enhanced. It's not necessarily true BRT, but it's enhanced transit, is how you would describe that. That does be, and then the B line as well, which is also that other orange line from Valparaiso to the South Shore and to Chicago. So that's interesting from a network point of view, and more or less reinforces the 15-minute city maps. Problem is that trying to superimpose this on the 15-minute city circles just got unreadable, so we've got to figure that out. But interesting. Okay, next slide. Oh yes, so this does get quite this gets interesting because so again from a regional perspective, we tend to talk about rail lines as being builders of density, but your regional trails could be as well to a greater degree. And what I've used here as an example is the Midtown Greenway in Minneapolis. So the Midtown Greenway is an old rail corridor that's actually depressed, fully grade separated. The only difference is that the regional trails in our regional trails here are not grade separated, but access because they were, in many cases, mainline railroads, so they don't have a street crossing every intersection. And the Midtown Greenway in Minneapolis has generated, since it was opened in 2009, $1.44 billion in new development of multi. So I took these photographs a number of years ago, and the on the lower right is a new aerial photo from Google. This is from 2019 or so, and it is solidly high density development along it. So it's not a rail line, although there's one that someday may be possibly going to happen along it. But it shows the power of a regional trail of building density. Not that we would want to do that in nature preserves, would be appropriate along the Oak Savannah or those trails. But there are places, I think about the Pennsy, the Erie Lackawanna, where from a regional perspective, those could actually support some of the same, almost what I call it, TOD also could stand for trail-oriented development.
I think there are a couple of corridors in Detroit that they want to use for that purpose. I mean, they've been trying to connect the mobility lab that they're pretty much creating from the old train station to downtown.
Yes.
Using trails.
Yeah, or think about the Gary Elevated idea, as another. Which was a very exciting idea, and really could become, given the relationship to a downtown that wants to be revitalized into the South Shore service and the shorter travel time, somewhat shorter travel time to Chicago, or at least more frequent service, that starts to become a pretty attractive place to rebuild Gary, starting in that core.
Well, I think we're gonna put a little bit of money toward the Gary Elevated Trail, just like 40,000, and then ask Gary to put another 10 to do some kind of preliminary planning. Before we might submit a discretionary grant application next year.
I think that's a very powerful project. Okay, next slide. We already saw that. Oh, you're going backwards.
No, I'm not. No. I'm going forward.
Oh, there we go. Okay, now, I guess I didn't, I left those in. I like them so much. Okay, let's go back to the last slide. So this is absolute population change, or actually percent change in population. And it's interesting because what you see, the darker colors are not rate of change, but higher absolute numbers. The lighter colors are population loss. And one of the things that's interesting here is seeing the maturing of some of the inner suburbs, of the slowing of growth in like Cherville and Maryville to some degree, from rapid rates that were earlier in the 40-year period from 80 to 2020. So you can also get a sense of how these are all growth rates relative to each other as opposed to absolute numbers. So, but you can see the faster growing areas have contracted a little bit as they filled up. St. John and in a minute you'll see increasingly Crown Point and Cedar Lake and even points as far south as Lowell are beginning to experience higher rates of growth.
Central.
St. John's, right, yeah.
Also has like.
Yeah, so that's that area to the left, right, right.
I'm wondering too, Marty, you broke this into two 30-year time periods.
No, one 10-year. So
one 10-year, yeah, right.
So one's long-term and one is recent.
I'm wondering, 1970 was kind of a pivotal year, I think, for the region. That's really when white flight started happening in Gary. I-65 was completed statewide in 74. I'm not sure what year.
So go back.
I'm just wondering if it would look any different if we went back another 10 years. Does anybody have a sense for that? I mean, that's when Gary's population.
Yeah,
Gary's population was still 151,000 in 1980.
Oh, it's still that high.
Yeah, still that high.
So they only lost
Before
like
that.
20,000.
I thought it was larger than that before, I don't know.
It was 178, I think.
Yeah, the peak was in the
178.
170s.
Yeah.
That was its peak.
Do enough term papers.
Yes, yeah, I mean, it was,
City of the
you're
century.
right though, it was losing.
City of the century.
Yeah, city of the century. I have,
Yeah, because I mean, the northern tier, the industrial cities along the north edge of Lake Michigan, they were still growing prior to 70, I think,
Yeah.
and then that's
and
when
then
the
they
turn
started.
Yeah.
You know,
So I mean, I don't know how helpful it would be to go back another decade. I'm just curious
no, it's
how different the
not
map
hard to
would look.
do.
Yeah.
Now, of course, with one exception, and that is Winfield didn't exist, right? So the Winfield numbers are 1990 to
Yes.
Yeah.
93.
Yeah, 90. Yeah. Okay, so now it gets where it gets really interesting is the next series, which get into rate of growth. So
Sorry, can we go back?
no, that's good. Yeah. So these are municipal and non-municipal growth rates. I had to explain to a young staff member what a 40th root was in terms of figuring out annual rate of growth over a long term. It's not just change in numbers and percentages, but it's an exponential function. So yeah. So this is showing actual average annual growth rates or change rates over these same periods of time. So you can see, and this is by municipal boundaries. So you can see Gary and East Chicago have over 40 years had an average annual loss of over 1%, which is dramatic from a negative point of view. And Gary's is now 1.93% over the last 10 years. It has those two, East Chicago and Gary, both have lost population at a rapid rate even over the last 10 years. But this is showing some interesting turnarounds. Specifically, the Michigan City area, which now has a minor growth gain, positive growth rate report, which is also kind of in the same boat. So that the tan color that you see from Michigan City is basically population stability from an annual growth perspective. So it's bracketed between minus 0.25% plus 2.25%. But the next slide shows, okay, yeah.
When's the
Porter
Porter County?
County missing the vision? Because I don't see any color in Porter County.
This Porter County is in the middle. So it's
on the
tan.
right.
Oh, it's
Yeah, it's tan. It's the middle light tan.
So it's
Oh.
between the green and
that's
the
fine.
light
Oh,
orange?
Yeah, it's actually,
Very
I actually,
Because I see
it is that, it's that category. I made it transparent so you could see the roads, otherwise it's just all blacked
okay.
out.
Okay.
It's that tan color, but it's just.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
just-
It's just transparency.
Okay.
Yeah,
Third from the bottom.
yeah.
So it's not, like, the thing is, I'm asking because it began population or not. Yeah, it's like in between these two, right?
Yeah, it's in the minus 0.25 to 0.25 meant to be that, I mean, we'll eventually make that a separated layer, but but I thought when I was just making the math, that to make that totally opaque, really
Okay.
weird, so you can really orient.
Yeah,
yourself, yeah.
the reason I'm asking, because I know that Porter County gained something.
Gain some population.
Yeah, that's,
Just not
not significant.
significant, no. Well, it gained population, but the growth rate was not that high. Okay, so now look at the next map. Yeah, this is interesting because here I've compared the short-term to long-term growth rates. And so the areas that are in blue have gone from negative to positive. And so that's
Still by municipality?
still by municipality. So that's Michigan City, Lake Station, and Highland. They're not wildly positive, but they're positive.
In the last 10 years or from?
Yeah, but if you compare the 40-year to the 10-year,
Okay.
that's kind of a change of status. So,
I've got a question, Marty. Because this part of Lake County is unincorporated,
yeah,
is it just included with the balance? So, okay.
yeah.
I mean,
I don't even know how that happened, but
yeah, I mean, that's like the
Should be
rural part
added.
of that township. I wonder if
Yeah.
we could.
yeah.
I think this is by Griffith area?
That's Cal Township, if you're talking about the orange area. between
Yeah.
Griffith
Yeah.
and,
Between Gary and Griffith?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, thank you.
Oh, thank
I gotta
you.
run.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, this is of all these growth rate maps are really the most interesting one. Because you're seeing even you'll notice that that at least Gary and to some degree Hammond and Whiting have been out migration areas or have stabilized at different levels. So Hammond's average annual change rate is over the last 10 years is about minus 0.4%, same as it's been over the long term. East Chicago is kind of the trouble spot in that its negative rates actually gotten somewhat worse in the last 10 years. And then oddly enough, well, like Beverly Shores and I don't, those are outliers because I don't even know why that's showing up like that. But it's an interesting it's interesting to see what's happening, particularly in terms of the places that really kind of turned around their.
Yeah. I'm looking at Burns Harbor, the gain population, I don't see like any significant development happening there.
The village of Brooks Harbor,
But that's
during that
before
time,
2010, yeah.
completely developed.
Yeah, completely developed now, so that's why.
Yeah, so their
That's such a
last
small
their last
population,
10
and you have a
years
major
so
subdivision like that.
major
Yeah,
major
yeah.
gain compared to the.
But yeah, greatest variety,
Yeah.
maybe it's completely developed now.
Yeah, I think that's the problem with some of those small towns is that,
Yeah,
you know,
it's,
you add 10
if you had
houses.
10 houses, one
way
way or the
up,
other.
and you
Yeah.
That's the
close one apartment building.
Yeah.
They had a storm to take out a decent percentage of the Beverly Shores houses. I know
That's
that happened in the mid-aughts.
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
Is, I have a question, the unincorporated Lake County, is that negative growth rate due to like annexation of areas into
Could
municipalities?
be,
That would make
Yeah.
sense.
and probably is.
That would make sense,
Yeah.
Okay.
because all those communities in green have
Have all
been
annexed.
aggressively.
You know,
Yeah.
patchwork annexation.
Yeah.
That thought came to mind looking at the.
Which is not a bad trend, actually. I mean,
Right.
that, yeah,
No, that's not a bad thing necessarily, as long as utilities are associated with it.
yeah. Yeah, and you'll notice that Lowell has gone to green here, that,
Yeah, all those communities in South Lake County have annexed aggressively.
Right.
So that would make, Tom, that would make sense. That would be the loss due to the annexation probably, because it's not that those areas aren't growing.
Right.
Well, that's an interesting question, because if an existing city annexes existing development, they gain population. But it's misleading for this graph, because nothing really has changed unless they're annexing to add
Yeah, you have
more
to delve
houses.
deeper into what's happening here to make it make sense.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, I
it's a
mean,
granular.
we can delve a little bit deeper and see what the overall population in that segment of the county is.
It grew by 25, its land area grew by 25%, but it was all undeveloped land, and now it's all becoming developed land. So it didn't take it away from the county in terms of population necessarily, so it's probably not as striking on the map. Because,
Okay, but the really interesting thing are the places that have turned around from negative to positive.
Yeah.
And
Well, it's definitely nice to see Gary and Hammond stabilize.
not getting worse.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
I mean, they're still losing.
Keep in mind that Gary's loss has been it's about 5 times Hammond's. Hammond is, and Hammond has done really, I think, a lot of really impressive things, in terms of community marketing and they will benefit from the South Shore. The downtown plan will add population. So, I think I would, if I were, and actually we did this, if I were to project Hammond forward, they would at least move up to stability, And so we factored that into one population model. Okay, so
real quick.
Yep.
Wondering, we were having a conversation about smaller communities and having an adverse impacts of development issues. I wonder if that same issue could be relevant with East Chicago, because so much of it is industrialized that the residential areas are basically 2 or 3 larger neighborhoods.
well, and the population is what, 30?
Yeah, it's
35,000.
something less than Maryville and Michigan City at this point.
Yeah.
Like looking at the last thing that I saw. And with the loss of the housing development because of the contamination, that by itself could have an adverse impact.
Absolutely.
Some of those people ended up in Hammond and Gary and Chicago. So that one, development closure could have a similar impact of the storm in North Shore.
that's absolutely right. Absolutely right.
I'm also curious how this would look at if you were to overlay sort of like the average age of, or sort of median age of the community, because as these communities age, the household, the children leave the house, the population goes down.
Yeah.
You might have the same number of households, but they're just smaller.
Yeah, and conversely, and we've got another set of maps that deal with housing unit growth. That you could have increases in the number of units and decreases in population. Because you get it, and this will often happen in central cities where new housing is built, but it's for singles or empty nesters. So the household population has gone down, but the number of units have gone up. I mean, the number of households goes up, but the population can go down. Or you get, or as you say, you get aging. You get aging populations, and they lose population just because of stability. The interesting thing, though, is that we have kind of hit the low point of that with baby boomers being one, unfortunately declining in population, and millennials who have delayed having kids, increase that household population increasing somewhat as those families settle down. I can speak from my own experience as a grandfather that's happened with kids who are in their later 30s who have young children. So so it's all there are a lot of explanations for what's happening here, and that's part of the discovery process is try to figure out what these.
Do we know if any of the municipalities in our region are looking at their single-family zoning and going toward allowing more like accessory dwelling units, like the granny flat above the garage? Or, I mean, that's a national thing that's going on, and I'm just wondering if.
I think if you talk to the more suburban / what do I want to say, county seat type towns, there's an adversity towards that concept, because there's a worry or fear that density equals problems. That's just been
Yeah, we certainly
my observation.
we certainly ran into that very issue in Bloomington. When we were doing a housing plan for Bloomington, it was in the middle of a city council controversy about eliminating single-family zoning and permitting up to 3 units on single-family lots, and they wound up compromising, and I don't know what they wound up doing, allowing it. I don't know. It went from for one thing went from by right to special permit, which means it probably would not happen. Some of the opposition was that
This is Bloomington, Indiana.
Bloomington, Indiana, yeah, that there were no the original ordinance concept didn't have a limitation on the size of the lot, so you could have 5,000 square foot lot with 3 houses, 3 units on it. My feeling about ADUs is generally that they're a good idea, but they're not going to move the density needle that much.
It's a very misunderstood concept,
Yeah.
especially outside major urban areas.
Yeah.
To answer your question though,
If you start talking about ADUs in most of the communities in Northwest Indiana, people are going to be terrified.
Yeah, I think there's.
Because it's very misunderstood.
Allowing that, right?
So-
One dwelling unit per parcel, one home. You can't build multiple homes. So if you wanted to have, we have a big Macedonian population, Winfield, so in that community, they have these houses and their entire families live in these massive houses. But so that's allowed. But if you wanted to build like a house behind the other house, you couldn't do that.
I just was wondering, mainly because some of our cities are landlocked and fully built out, and if they were going to, and we have declining household sizes, the only way to keep density stable
Well, I mean,
or
you're-
increasing might
But
be.
I
to-
saw
Your
some
community
people
is a
that,
good example of.
In Munster,
Maybe
we permit
George,
ADUs.
you
You
in
do, but it's
Sherwood-
kind of like a
in
secret.
Sherwood
I
Forest,
don't think
they did
anybody
that.
really knows it.
I know some families, they built another
I went
house
to one of my detached garage.
I mean,
for
even
their
in-
lot, for their kids.
Even in Michigan City,
It was
even in
probably a
Michigan
double lot.
City, people were terrified of the concept of
No, it
ADUs.
was one lot, but it was
I
one
know
bedroom.
Because
And they built
they invoke
Sure.
this fear, this
Oh, I know.
feeling that,
Yeah.
they're gonna have apartments all over single family neighborhoods and people living in garages and things like that, and it's a much misunderstood. You'd have to do a lot more education, and you'd have to have pretty strict standards as to how those are done.
Well, in the legacy community that exists, I mean, I lived next to, a property that had, attached to a house in the back, and I know it exists in Chesterton. I knew someone who lived in one.
Yeah, some of the communities allow them in granny flats, for lack of a better
Yeah,
term.
granny flats, right.
Some people, but what you see is sometimes you'll see towns allow them with the current owner, for a relative, if it wants to have a relative on the property, they'll allow it for the current owner, but if that ever changes, they have to come back and get an approval again, with change of ownership. I mean, that that's a slippery slope, but yeah, that's a much misunderstood.
I hijacked the conversation here with my question.
Yeah, well, it's a good question. I don't, yeah, one of my daughters lives in Culver City, California, on what actually in a townhouse, but what actually looks like a single family neighborhood, except it isn't. Because almost every lot have ADUs or mobile ADUs on the backside of the lot.
Just because the lot's $2 million, right? Just for
Yeah, well, I mean, that's why the density of Los Angeles that everybody thinks is such a low density environment is about 11,000 people per square mile.
And the big worry is parking.
And you cannot park on.
The big worry is
That's
parking.
exactly right. Yeah, and except that you can't park anywhere in Los Angeles, so that's sort of part of the.
ADUs can be done well when there's transit. When there's not transit readily available, ADUs are become a big problem really fast because you can't park properly.
Yeah.
So
If you define parking as a problem.
Well, it is. To me, it's
But
interesting.
we do. I mean,
In reality,
in this area, we
in
do.
the Midwest, it
Like
is.
I said, in LA, nobody expects it. So when people, I'm sorry, what people will do is on garbage collection day, they will stick their garbage can in the street in their own parking spot. You know, it's.
On Hamtramck, we always put the chair
You
out.
can't do that here.
We always put the chair out, and you didn't move that
Yeah.
chair. And
You
when they're
put it on
working,
Hamtramck?
well, and my Batra and Jaja,
Okay.
yeah. So my mother, well, it's a long story,
Okay, all right.
but absolutely, Freedom Apostles Church.
Okay, so let's move on. So the next slide looks at population density. So here we have taken the gross density, the gross population, and the gross area of each city, and have mapped that. This is actually population. This is actually by census tract. So the darkest category, which is just a few places in Whiting, a few tracts in Whiting and Hammond, are high urban densities. If you look at the top three categories, which are over 2,000 people per square mile, those are places where, in theory, you begin to be able to support transit.
What do the left and right maps show?
Okay, the one on the left is population density, the one on the right is residential density.
Okay.
So, although it does not say that, it's units per.
Well,
it's
on
units
the
per acre.
legend, it says housing.
Housing, yeah.
Housing units per acre?
Yeah, housing units per acre.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so on the right-hand map, anything that's in the dark brown or the kind of second tier down are effectively over 3.5 units per acre. Not very much. I mean, most of it. So it will be when we then look at potential population, the TODs are going to have a significant effect on that. As well as projects like the banks, which are really changing, are changing that equation, because that's zero population to hundreds. Yeah. So, but this is 2020. Okay, next. Okay, so now we're looking forward a little bit, and we have done one rough scenario here that's based on the following assumptions: that we use historic growth rates as a base. In fast-growing places, we reduce that rate significantly. So, for example, Winfield, which has a very high growth rate from 1990 on to 2020, slows down pretty dramatically because the the population growth doesn't necessarily change in absolute numbers, but the rate changes, because the base is bigger. So we've kind of adjusted those downward in these places that had like 6% annual growth rates. Minor increase in turnaround cities. So we've taken the cities that we see as transitioning. That would be LaPorte, Hammond, Michigan City, surrounding areas, and increase those in not dramatically, but in a reasonable rate. Increase the rate along South Shore Line. Stabilize the negative rate cities. We didn't necessarily reduce them that much, but so they're not going to get any worse. Reduce the rate in mature suburbs from the historical rate. So that's more tracking their last 10 years' performance. So like Schererville, which had a 2% population growth rate over 40 years, but 0.4% in the last 10 years, just continued that on because it's more or less built up. Sustained a high growth rate in growing mature cities, so a place like Crown Point, which is increasing at a rapid annual rate, but has been a build-up city. We maintain that rate, and then just a flat population in rural areas. So what that generates, what that model generates, is a municipal population over the next 30 years to 2050 of about 740,000. A rural population of about 160,000. That may be too low, depending upon whether places annex that or able to annex that growth or not. A total MSA population of 900,000, which is not quite as much as some of the old plans were proposing, but so that's an average annual MSA-wide growth rate of a little over 0.5% per year.
What has that been historically by comparison?
Historically, between 1980 and 2020, 0.11%.
And you're proposing what?
0.55%.
Wow.
Yeah, except here's the trick, that if you take Gary out of the equation, if you said, let's control for Gary, so leave that out entirely, then everything else grew at an average rate over 40 years of 0.8%. So, so it's sort of, it's that kind of interference pattern on the sine curve of the peaks in some places and the valleys in some places evening out and being relatively flat.
Right, so it's not like any of these places are going to grow at a quicker rate than they have in the past. It's just that those declining places are going to shrink maybe at a lower rate.
Yeah, right. But
You said there are
yeah,
you said Hammond, Michigan City, LaPorte are
where they're
starting to turn around.
where they're starting to reverse, where they're doing things. They've either changed their population curve or they're doing things that will.
Thinking about finding meaning in all of this.
Yeah.
It's like
It's sort of
the worst is over maybe for some of these places.
That's right.
And we're now-
That's what we're
the hope.
speculating.
Well, this isn't even taking into account the people from Illinois that are starting to
move over,
Which is going to happen more
housing.
and more and more.
That's where we're seeing demand, people buying up things in future subdivisions.
Yeah.
And what we're hearing is that people are leapfrogging Lake County and going to Porter and starting to look at LaPorte.
But even in places like Edna and Gary, I'm not sure if I mentioned this in a previous meeting, but I know people who moved out of houses that were valued at $14,000 and 15, 20 years ago, they're selling for 200. People coming in, flipping them, they're selling and then going home.
And when
Yeah.
Miller's built, when Miller Station is built, that is going to
That's already happening, and not just in Etna, but the older communities in Miller, downtown Miller itself.
Yeah.
Houses that I looked at, 5, 10 years ago, I can't afford anymore.
Yeah, Miller's Place.
So you
That
will
whole
see
area.
that the 2020 home values, from census are incredibly undervalued. You see, I mean, it's like crazy low average value. Census tends to underestimate that anyway. But it is that phenomenon that the probably the increasing demand is eliminating that problem, and a little bit of the information from Zillow is showing that.
Yeah, it's in the housing, I saw that.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting,
Very
showing
interesting.
what's the demand,
Yeah.
like in the next
Yeah.
20 years.
Yeah. There are a lot of there have been a lot of bargains.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if we took this assumption, just as a model, we would be seeing and assumed a net density of 5 units per acre, which corresponds to about a gross of 3.5. That would require about 15.6 square miles between now and 2050, which is what you see in what looks like a yellow Rubik's cube up at the top. So these are actually square miles in scale to the map. So distributed around roughly in proportion to past growth rates, it looks something like this. Oh, the other interesting thing, another interesting place that seemed a little bit anomalous until I saw the town was Couts. Couts is a beautiful little town, and its population rate has really, its growth rate's really jumped up. I didn't even know it was there until the last trip. But,
Well, I'm still discovering stuff too, Marty, so.
Yeah, good schools.
It's a little hamlet. Yeah.
So when you located the yellow squares on the map, you just
kind of proportion those.
I mean, it's just an indication of where growth
might occur, but not a plan for it.
I'm wondering,
It's taking 15.5 square miles and saying, well, maybe 3 of those might be in St. John as a fast-growing place. We know there's huge activity already in Crown Point, so we've got 3 square miles. Just kind of randomly, not randomly, but making an educated guess in terms of assignment of a scenario assignment to specific areas. Again, it's not a plan; it's a model or an exploration.
So I mean, the growth, the physical location.
They don't have room to grow. I don't know about Tom Munster. Do you have like almost 1 square mile like that to add like more people? You don't. That's what I'm saying.
No,
that would be
you'll see a densification.
That would be densification, though.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, high density.
Yeah.
And high density.
Yeah, what happens if-
Your position for
Well,
it.
that's what happens when you're landlocked, I mean, what happens when you run out of land?
As opposed to us, where we have square miles worth of land that are on utilities, that have utilities available.
That you could,
Yeah, we've got water and sewer available to areas of the city that are square miles worth of available land.
I mean, in theory, there could be a scenario in which all of this is in unbuilt parts of Gary.
Refill.
Yeah, I mean, literally, it could be. That's why, don't read this as anything more than an illustration.
I'm gonna take off. Thanks.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
So,
Hey, George, take care.
okay, so anyway,
And that's just looking at the growth side.
just looking at
Equation.
yeah.
It's not
It's-
net growth, so you subtract it off where the losses occurring.
Yeah.
I wonder if it would be interesting to show.
No, this is like assuming 160,000 more people, basically. So basically, it's distributing 35,000.
So it is the net growth now.
Yeah, net growth. Okay, so let's look at the next one. So this is simply, I won't belabor this, but this is simply looking at,
Yeah.
existing comprehensive plans. And so we've reviewed all of these documents, and these are things that are more or less constant policies throughout. Mainly people, most of the plans advocate continuous growth, want better multimodal transportation, look better, less dependence on Chicago, more economic development locally. This is an interesting one from a land use perspective, because you start to look at, is there an area out in what's now rural that ought to be a job center, that ought to be more, that ought to be devoted to job creation, as opposed to depending on either Chicago or the industrial Northwest.
Well, yeah, if you talk with Chris Murphy from American Structure Point on the economic development issues surrounding the Willow Creek extension.
Ours is all.
No.
Well, I think some of those areas are blank because the comp plans,
Well,
we couldn't
See,
get.
that's part of
yeah,
what,
Half of them were hopelessly outdated.
Yeah.
and that's what
But
we're trying to accomplish, is get a comprehensive plan for the 30 square miles directly
Yeah.
south of Portage, directly south
Yes,
of here.
yeah, absolutely right, and it doesn't show up here because there isn't one.
But we need one desperately.
Yeah. And
Ready, man?
And Maryville's is like 33 years old.
Yeah.
How old
Or
is
20,
Portage?
20 years.
How old is
What?
Porter County's plan?
Only for
I
this
just
year.
found also the count point one was missing from our data, but it's 2018.
Oh, is it?
I'm going to send it to you.
Okay.
So you can-
Okay. I think it's in there. I think we put it.
No, you're missing
Are
from.
we missing crosswalks?
Swamp was empty.
I think you're right. We had an area.
You don't have comp plans.
Well, it looks like part of Hammond, part of Geary, and Lake Station in East Chicago are blank. That,
Yeah, I think it's
One,
it's covering it up.
I think once that Tom, you're doing comprehensive plan now, right?
We are, yeah, and our
Yeah,
2010
that's
master
true.
plan doesn't have a land use.
Yeah.
Oh, it doesn't?
No, it's not really, it's more like a redevelopment.
Or a redevelopment strategy?
It's really not an issue in a build up.
Yeah, I mean, it's.
Yeah, unless you have redevelopment areas. Yeah, I mean, Gary's comprehensive plan has tons of residential. I mean,
But it has residential along actually the 98 to 94,
yeah,
which they said they're gonna revisit these areas.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make sense
Yeah.
to have
Yeah.
residential right on highway.
right on highway.
Yeah.
But it's got all the vacant areas covered for residential.
Residential,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Which is pretty aspirational.
Well,
Not necessarily strategic. Okay, so anyway, let's, we're probably running just a little bit late, so, so next one. So here we're looking at housing unit change. And again, there's nothing incredibly surprising here, except that,
That's count? Oh, that's the miracle.
that's Maryville.
It's the new white flag thing.
Yeah. So that's 2010, 2020 census. Yeah.
It's just crazy, and I know personally what they're dealing with. Their utilities.
So,
roads.
So next slide.
It's just horrendous.
So these are the housing values according to the census by municipality. And you can see that it's just crazy low. Even in areas where you would expect it to be more, their values at this point are still under 200,000. So the only places that really made a lot of sense are Munster, St. John. It's like very, very weird.
I would say that the Munster number is probably one color to affordable. Munster's probably.
I know, it's higher, that's,
In the last few years,
yeah, that's census, I mean.
in the last few
2020
years, those
census.
numbers have changed dramatically
Yeah,
in the entire region.
yeah,
But
Well, it's a relative thing, I mean, relative scale, right?
probably is, yeah.
And, I mean, one thing I'm noticing too, like, you're showing purple, which I think says, does it say over
350,
350?
Those are,
Some of those
yeah,
communities like Long Beach, I think they're all over 1 million.
Yeah.
those are wealthy lakeshore communities.
Yeah, that's all by the lake.
yeah, I mean, it's better to look at this as probably a relative thing. But
Yeah, it's interesting because in the
Yeah.
past few years, like the values in Michigan City, for example, had doubled.
But,
But in Munster, they've tripled or quadrupled depending on the situation.
And the housing within the county is actually higher than 350. So if you look at the county housing too, it's, some in the area between Valparaiso and Washington, and you have actually
Yeah.
like half a million.
yeah,
Well, and I'm wondering too, like those purple islands along the lake, you could almost see where like the Miller neighborhood and Whiting could really pick up too.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, Whiting's starting to get a lot of brand new development, and they're filling in vacant lots and.
yeah, this
Is
is,
this
this
by
is,
municipality?
It's taking average.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no, I know,
because
right.
they
Yeah.
have from 50,000 up to.
Yeah, it's
Maybe
by municipality, so you can't break out another.
Yeah.
Miller,
Right.
and Miller, Glen Park, and Robertsdale, and,
Yeah.
Woodmore.
Right.
Would be
Would be outliers, yeah, clearly.
yeah, we
If you did
might,
by census
we
tract,
might
it'd
be
be a
able,
whole different story.
we can probably get census tract numbers for this.
That'd be a pretty interesting picture
Yeah.
because you would see Miller,
Yeah,
and
it's going to be ACS.
Robertsdale, and places like that.
Yeah, some of those are going to pop out.
I just
We
think
do have
it
it by
really
lot-
shows the
lot-
opportunity of if we
lot
invest a
group.
little bit in some of those
Yeah,
neighborhoods.
no,
I think
I
we
think,
have-
I think we can get that.
Yeah, it will show more accurate.
Yeah, yeah,
The numbers. But what was interesting actually,
Is that-
the needs,
yeah,
like that's based on the income.
yeah, so
household
what
income.
we've done here, you can't see it, but we
That's why.
we have a process where we will take the number of households within specific income groups, compare those with the number of units, rental and owner, that are quote affordable to those income groups, and then compare the demand from the supply. And what that that suggests, for example, that there is a surplus of there are more units in the kind of moderate price range than people who really need them.
Yeah.
And fewer in the higher price range.
This is exactly 3 years ago.
Yeah,
I bought my house 5 years ago, and
and that's what it was.
and it's what it shows for my neighborhood is accurate.
Yeah,
It's,
so we're able to kind of
I'm just curious what that
just,
was.
it's a way of projecting whether there's a demand for higher cost housing or how large the demand for lower cost housing.
yeah, which I think interesting, like
Oh, I commuted from
that
Michigan City,
the low
so,
income, but like,
from
with-
well,
that's the
from
affordable housing that we're missing.
Yeah,
So we're missing
along
almost,
with everybody else.
yeah, so that's interesting, and I see also the 200 to 250, it's missing, so
Yeah,
that's, I think it's a good
Yeah.
observation for the
for the
affordable housing,
affordable housing.
yeah,
Yeah.
so I think I see this number
Mhm.
very helpful.
Yeah, it is very interesting.
Yeah, very interesting,
Yeah.
to see that, like, we're
Yeah,
missing
where those-
significant
Yeah,
affordable housing.
yeah.
Uh,
And the interesting
That's
problem
interesting.
is often that the people who don't need, I mean, you can't just pick people up and move around, but the people who don't need affordable housing are living on it. And the people who do need it are sort of
so, yeah,
out of the market or overpaying. That's kind of what that all involves. And, it's hard to tell people they're not paying enough for housing.
Yeah, I
You know,
know.
But some of that existing stock you really can't replace at that cost. It's being occupied by people who, are we sort of don't need it.
Yeah, we don't
could,
need it.
could in the most rational of all possible worlds, move up the ladder and open that stock up
For the other.
for the lower.
Yeah, lower, yeah.
Which is not necessarily a good thing, by the way, because that sort of means that neighborhoods deteriorate. I mean, it's an interesting, right now, it makes no value judgment on that. It's just sort of a matching analysis that shows where the needs are.
And I think that's, again, like with the new development, they should have a good mix of income and,
That's right.
I live in Aberdeen and they have the houses or apartments starting from 150 to a million or over a million. So they have a good mix. So they have a good mix of income and people. And I think this is a good example
Right.
that developers should, or I think it should come from the communities.
Right.
That they should let them, have like a number of units that are affordable, so
Right.
they won't get deteriorated area.
Right. The other thing that it begins to imply is that because the cost of building single family detached housing is rarely under $400,000 anymore. That the only way to produce affordable, at least owner occupied housing is through higher density development, small lot development, attached development, townhome development. And because you just can't build, you cannot build new housing supply for anybody else.
The village here in Burns Harbor is also a good example.
It's a good example.
Yeah, because you have apartments, you have small houses, larger houses.
I want to take, since I'm out this way, I want to take a look at that.
Ty is living there now.
Yeah, I know.
Ty moved there, yeah.
There's a pattern out there.
Oh, the horsemen, yeah,
Developers that grew up.
Yeah.
yeah.
Right, they don't do it now.
Yeah, and here, I think a real key to Gary is downtown Horseman and Emerson. It's that kind of northern tier of.
I think Hub built some of these townhomes in Horseman. I remember this residential. Yeah.
I know, and they also developed some 20 years ago.
Yeah, about 15 years ago, yeah. They built some there, in Horseman.
So finally, last slide, is kind of moving forward. So what we've done here is identify policy areas, kind of different areas with appropriate regional policies. So they range from clusters of the cities. So for example, we have the Northwest Industrial Cities, so that's Lake Station and Gary and Whiting and Hammond. The West Side Corridor, the growth areas, which are the green ones, the sort of mature central suburbs. We'll call it the East Shore, which is the LaPorte Valparaiso, Michigan City triangle, and then the interstitial areas and rural areas to begin to show some sort of groupings of like communities that we can identify generalized policies for.
So these are similarities between these communities that have like issues, interests, that kind of thing.
Similar
or
interests that
opportunities.
kind of came together, yeah.
Westlake.
And then these lower density areas between, so that also are somewhat different.
So this recognizes that kind of State Road 2
Yeah, State Road 2 divide.
line of demarcation
Yeah.
between.
Yeah, the idea being that green area is going to be primarily rural
Yeah.
and rural preservation.
You had the watershed line too?
Yeah,
I
well,
don't know if you have a ship line for that,
yeah.
but I think it's going almost.
It's
same-
almost on
same.
that.
Yeah.
It's almost exactly on that line. Yeah. Yeah, and then finally,
That yellow one, and it's interesting to know, Marty, that somewhat, and is that that yellow in the East Shore area that you're showing
yeah,
generally kind of mimics the urbanized area.
right,
Generally speaking, not exactly, but it's similar.
yeah, and it's kind of, well,
The UCA boundary.
it's sort of I was, so there's Valparaiso, so the purple one, the Valparaiso to, is like Meridian Avenue, that
Well, it's
corridor.
Meridian, it's Union Township,
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah,
parts of Border.
and the yellow one,
Border
the
Township.
is Michigan
It's
City,
like
to
Buzzard,
the port, and then south to Westville, yeah.
So,
It's a pretty nice area.
I was just pointing out though that the urbanized areas, the Chicago urbanized area map, it kind of mimics that connection between Michigan and LaPorte, or Michigan City and LaPorte, somewhat. So
Is Westville in that small area?
it's not, no.
Okay.
Westville doesn't fall in that.
Yeah.
That's why I said generally speaking.
Yeah.
Because when LaPorte
I mean,
County,
Westville's kind of an outlier.
when LaPorte County applies for Group 2 funds, they can only apply for those funds in certain areas.
Right.
Because they're urbanized area boundary.
Mhm.
And it's mainly the area between LaPorte and Michigan City. Johnson Road basically is what it is.
Yeah.
But I think Westville falls
I
outside. I may be
never-
mistaken, but I think Westville falls
Yeah.
outside
It's
that.
pretty interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's good.
And then finally, what we did on the last map,
Kind of halfway point between.
is to do
Next
the
slide.
next one. This is gonna be hard
That's kind
to
of
read,
interesting
but
collection.
policy corridors. So now we're looking at, areas that might want to have both in this plan and maybe subsequent ones, specific area studies or involve specific typologies that we can show development patterns along. So it goes from, what we call regional big boxes. So this is like South Lake, or even something like Indianapolis and Maine, that cluster of things that are more than one, and usually more than 2 or 3 big boxes that are kind of regional in scope, down to the what we call the urban commercial corridors, some of which have pretty short frontages. Times we were talking about these, so it'd be like Kennedy Avenue in Highland, or in Calumet, or emerging corridors, which would be like Indianapolis Boulevard and St. John, that are
That really needs to be under control.
yeah.
The track, I'm just here to tell you, the people that live in St. John and Cedar Lake are going to just have absolute woeful experiences with traffic in the coming years because of
That's
the lack of connections.
I think that's an important one, and I'll tell you, one of the things that's been kind of a common recommendation in urban corridor studies that we've done is trying to thread a secondary circulation system through these areas. And if we, so for example, well, we've done 2 of these in Arkansas, one in Fayetteville and one in Conway. And in both cases, you can see the example of what happens if you don't have those.
That's why Klein Ave is so critical.
Yeah.
Klein Ave is a critical connection between Cherville and Cedar Lake.
Yeah.
And they apply, and St. John has this, and Nercy has identified that as a critical connection that needs to be done. Because if that's not done,
It's in the plan.
US 41 is just misery.
Yeah.
That and to some extent, I guess, an upgrade to Calumet, or not Calumet, what is it? Sheffield. Is it Sheffield? It goes from Dyer to St. John.
Yeah.
I think it's Sheffield.
Sheffield.
Those are critical.
Yeah, they are. And if you don't have, you talked about Highway 41, Highway 40, US 41 in Florida is what you wind up getting, which is like horrible. I mean, just absolutely disaster. Yeah, it's miserable.
It's US 19 in Florida, it's 41 in Florida, it's,
Yeah.
Good. And I'd like to bring up again the point, perhaps we can talk later, but with the
Willow Creek is another one.
planning,
Yeah.
planning, and it's perfectly, relatively blank slate,
Yeah,
so it needs to be responsibly planned now,
Absolutely.
not after the fact.
not after, yeah, because it's a lot harder to do after.
Right.
It's an interesting puzzle, but it's a lot easier.
Well,
to
I
do.
call it Union Gap, that gap, whether people like it or not, it's gonna be filled in. You see from Valparaiso to Lake County.
One city that did a very good job of this is, oddly enough, is Grand Forks, North Dakota. That did, at least on the north side of its principal kind of strip, did good street continuity that serves the strip, but it also is kind of adjacent to multifamily residential to the north. Anyway, we're probably at our time, but we will get copies of the Part 1 draft to you, and
This
then
presentation.
yeah, and then you can. It's this
I
one.
will
It's
take
the
the
narrative.
presentation and post it under the land use committee.
Okay.
And the report, I will send it to all of you for to review and provide any comments
Mhm.
as a,
And I think I'd like to show this to our township board at the township meeting.
Yeah.
Because there's so much going on. I know the people have to leave, but, you want to say anything about your community before you go? Because that's,
Well, real quick for us, we've got what we're calling a rolling fall summit, 2:30 next Wednesday, well, a week from today. We're going to be riding the L5 bus route and talking over some of the issues and some of the plans we've got for GPTC. We'll talk about tactical urbanism. We actually have crosswalks in place now. Our plan, we got a survey out right now for expanding into the lighting North Hammond area. It's live. It will be followed immediately by a survey on preferences for a transit center bike share that we've got funding for. So again, 2:30 next week at the Metro Center. We'll be jumping on the L5 bus route and talking.
Cool.
I just got a brief update on our comprehensive plan. We kicked it off in August. We've been working with the consultant, Hauser Levine. They've been putting together an existing conditions report. We'll probably have that in the next week or so. And we've got some public meetings coming up in December. Haven't nailed down the date, but it's looking like December 8th, I think, which is I believe a Thursday. So we'll get everybody's.
Keep in mind that there's no way that we can know everything that's going on. So when you get this, the more information that we can get that's relevant, the better.
Well, and it'd be great to have some of this data to go the other way.
To go the
into
other
our
way.
plan. So if we can get that PowerPoint, that'd be great.
Yeah, it's
and
a
just-
very interesting part.
And just remember, where we are is we're at the end of phase
I do a
one,
good job
defining
of running
meeting or existing
away
conditions
without-
phase. We're starting into phase 2, which is the creating purpose or future scenarios, future conditions.
I will send you.
So we don't have all the answers here, obviously.
Okay. Sorry, I gotta go. My daughter can go to lunch. So I
Thank you.
will
Thank you.
I'm still only here about next year.
Kids these days.
Okay, all right.
Go Detroit Lions.
We're wrapping an interesting thing we're working on that ties directly to what we're talking about here. And LaPorte is very focused on from a policy standpoint and opportunity standpoint. We're wrapping up a housing study right now with SB Friedman. I think I told you that. We're working with them yet. So it's been very interesting because there's a lot of pent up demand in LaPorte County. What we've seen is there's a lack of upper end housing in LaPorte County and a lack of affordable housing, of restricted affordable housing.
And that's what you see in those numbers too.
And what's happening is it's putting pressure on the middle of from both directions. And so what we've
Okay, thanks.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank
Okay.
you.
Great meeting.
One last thing, Union Gap is, going to be, going to be meeting on the Willow Creek. The No Willow Creek people meet October 27th. I won't be able to attend that meeting. Those are people that, actually feel like they don't know what's going on. I think that's their biggest concern. Of course, they don't want to lose their farms and all that sort of thing, which is understandable. So, some of the families have had those farms for 4 generations. That went back to the early 1800s. Then November the 15th, 5 to 8 at the Expo Center, American Structure Point, and Bob Thompson from Porter County will be putting on a 3-hour presentation, including showing the flyover of the route. And each side of that route is supposed to have a half-a-mile economic development plan going on, and there's people attempting and having acquired a great deal of property in Union Township. And the discussions have been for a 30 square mile town. So,
Wow.
well,
I'll be right back. I'm going to run down.
oh, I understand. All right, well, in conclusion, any other comments? There being none, meeting adjourned.
Great.
Thank you.
Hey, Tom, is that Tom's jacket?
Um,
It's not anyone.
No,
else's?
it's a Scott.